Hi there, welcome to Systems of Equations Review. Question number 1, solve by graphing. How do we solve by graphing? Well, we need to graph both equations and find their intersection point. So how do we graph the equations? Well, we first start by converting them to slope-intercept form. So what is slope-intercept form? Slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So we isolate for y. So I'm looking at my first equation, and to isolate for y, I first subtract 4x from both sides. Why do I subtract? Because it's positive. So what does that give me? That gives me 5y equals negative 4x plus 10. I now need to get y alone. So I divide both sides by 5, and I get y equals negative 4 over 5x plus 2. Next, I'm going to do the same thing with my second equation. How do I do that? Well, I want to get y alone, so I'm going to move negative 4x over the other side. Because it's negative, I'm going to add, giving me 6y equals 5x. I now divide both sides by 6, which gives me y equals 5 over 6x. So what's my next step? Well, I graph the first equation. My y-intercept is 2, so I put a dot at 2. My slope is negative 4 over 5. That means that my rise is minus 4, so I go down 4. My run is 5, I go over 5. I now draw a line going through both of these points. You should use a straight edge, although I can't because I can't use it on my tablet. So what does that give me? Y equals negative 4 over 5 x plus 2. Don't forget to always label your equations. My second equation has no constant. So what does that mean? That means that my y-intercept has to be 0. My slope is 5 over 6. So what does that mean? My rise is 5, my run is 6. Therefore, I'm going to go up 5 and over 6. And put a dot there. I'm now ready to draw my line. So I draw my next line, put arrows on the end. Don't forget to label your equation, y equals 5 over 6x, and I find the intersection point. So I state my solution. Now, you try and be as accurate as possible, and based on what I see, my solution appears to be 1, 1. My x value is 1, my y value is 1. Our second equation involves solving by substitution. To solve by substitution, we isolate for one of the variables in one of the equations, and then substitute the solution back into the other equation for the same variable. So I look at these two equations, and I notice that the first one has numbers that are all divisible by 3. So I think that is the easier equation to work with. Then I notice that the variable x has a 3 in front of it. Therefore, if I divide all numbers by 3, I won't have any fractions. So I've decided I'm going to use the first equation and isolate for x. So how do I do that? My first thing is I am going to take 9 and I am going to subtract it from both sides. Why? Because it is positive. So I now have 6y minus 9 equals 3x. I need to get x alone, so I'm going to divide both sides by 3, giving me x is equal to 6 divided by 3 is 2y, negative 9 divided by 3 is minus 3. Now, I'm going to take 2y minus 3, or whatever x equals, and I'm going to substitute it into the other equation for x. So that's going to give me 5 multiplied by 2y minus 3 minus 2y equals negative 7. Now, in order for me to combine my like terms, I need to get rid of the brackets. How do I get rid of the brackets? I multiply by 5. So 5 times 2y is 10y. 5 times minus 3 is minus 15. Minus 2y equals negative 7. Okay, at this point, I'm going to combine my like terms. 10y minus 2y is 8y. Minus 15 equals negative 7. I now need to get y alone, so I'm going to add 15 to both sides. I now have 8y equals negative 7 plus 15 is positive 8. I want to get y alone, so I divide both sides by 8, giving me an answer of y equals 1. I now need to find x because my solution requires both x and y. So I pick my equation that's easiest to work with to find x. And that is x is equal to 2y minus 3. And I now substitute 1 in for y. X equals 2 times 1 minus 3. 2 times 1 is 2 minus 3, which gives me negative 1. X equals negative 1. My final step is to state my solution. In this case, my solution is my x value of negative 1, my y value of positive 1. This example asks us to determine the slope, y-intercept, and number of solutions for the linear system provided. So, to do this, we need to put the equation into slope-intercept form, which we remember as y equals mx plus b. So I need to isolate for y. In my first equation, to isolate for y, I'm going to take 2, and because it's negative, I'm going to subtract. I'm going to take x and subtract it from both sides, giving me y equals negative x minus 2. So from this, my slope is the number in front of x, which is negative 1. My y-intercept is the constant, which is negative 2. I now look at the second equation, and I want to get y alone. So I'm going to take 6, and I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides. I now have x minus 6 equals negative 2y. I now need to get y alone by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2, giving me y equals, the number in front of x is 1, so that's going to be 1 over negative 2, or negative 1/2 x. Negative 6 divided by negative 3 is 2 is plus 3. At this point, my slope on the second equation is negative 1/2. My y-intercept is 3. All right, so how many solutions? Well, based on the fact that we have different slopes, we know that there is one solution. How do we know? Because they have different slopes. Our final example asks us to solve by elimination. To eliminate, we basically add or subtract the equations to get rid of one of our variables. However, there is a problem here. The problem is, no matter what I add or subtract, I will not get rid of one of my variables. So how do I solve for this? I multiply each equation by a number that will give me the same coefficient in front of one of the variables. I've decided that I'm going to get rid of or eliminate x. So that means I need a number that both 3 and 4 go into evenly. That number is 12. So what do? I'm going to multiply my first equation by 4 to get 12. So 3x times 4 is 12x. 2y times 4 is plus 12 plus 8y. And 7 times 4 is 28. My second equation, to get 12, I multiply 4 by 3. So I'm going to multiply this entire equation by 3. So what's that going to give me? 3 times 4x is 12x. 3 times 5y is plus 15y. Equals 3 times 14 is 42. All right. Now, to add or subtract. Based on what I see, the 12x's have the same sign. If they have the same sign, I'm going to subtract. If they have different signs, I would add them. So 12x minus 12x is 0x. That's my goal. 8y minus 15y is negative 7y. And 28 minus 42 is negative 14. I now need to get y alone, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 7, giving me an answer of y equals 2. I now need to find my x value. So, how do I find x? I am going to take one of my equations and substitute y back into it. I could, if this were a fraction answer, redo the elimination to eliminate the y to solve for x as well. So I'm going to pick the first equation. 3x plus 2y equals 7. And I'm going to take y is equal to 2 and substitute it back in. So I now have 3x plus 2 times 2 equals 7. Therefore, 3x plus 4 equals 7. I take 4, I subtract it from both sides, giving me 3x equals 3. Divide both sides by 3, giving me x equals 1. Therefore, my solution is 1, 2.